The millionaire scoffed as the single mom struggled with her restless child, until the plane lurched, masks dropped, and a trembling voice crackled over the speakers. "Any fighter pilot on board?" Every head turned. The boarding gate buzzed with quiet impatience. The shuffle of briefcases, the click of heels, the hum of overworked air vents. Among the polished crowd stood Leah Torres, balancing a worn duffel bag on one shoulder and a sleepy 6-year-old on her hip. Her son, Eli, clung to a stuffed bear, missing one eye. The agent scanned their tickets with a polite but distracted smile. "You're in row 23. Ma'am." "Thank you," Leah murmured, her voice soft yet measured, like someone who'd learned to make herself small in loud places. Behind her, a man in an impeccable navy suit sighed loudly. "Some people act like they've never boarded a plane before," he muttered, not bothering to lower his voice. Leah turned slightly, just enough to see Daniel cross. Tall, poised, scrolling through his phone with an air of practiced importance. His silver watch glinted under the fluorescent lights. The kind of man who measured time by deals closed, not moments lived. She offered a brief, apologetic smile, a peace offering, but he didn't look up. The cabin smelled of recycled air and expensive cologne. As passengers settled, Daniel took his first-class seat, 2A. When a flight attendant offered champagne, he accepted it with the faintest smirk. Meanwhile, Leah guided Eli down the crowded aisle. Her seat, 23C. She lifted the bag into the overhead compartment, her arm trembling from fatigue. Eli kicked his sneakers against the seat, humming a made-up tune. Across the aisle, a businessman frowned. A woman in pearls whispered, "You'd think she'd keep that boy quiet." Leah pretended not to hear. Her cheeks burned anyway. "Mommy, my ears hurt." Eli whimpered as the plane began taxiing. She rubbed his small hand. "Just swallow, baby. Like this." Her tone was gentle but weary. There was a heaviness in her eyes that spoke of nights spent working double shifts and mornings packing lunches before dawn. Daniel glanced back toward the commotion. The little boy's whines irritated him, cutting into the calm he expected for his Madeira workspace. He slid his laptop onto the tray, muttering, "Fantastic. A babysitting flight." When the seatbelt sign dimmed, the attendant passed by. "Can I get you something, sir?" "Yes," Daniel said dryly. A noise-canceling miracle. The attendant smiled awkwardly, unsure if he was joking. Leah caught the words, though. Her shoulders stiffened. Eli dropped his juice box, spilling orange liquid across the floor. Daniel's sharp intake of breath followed immediately. "Careful, sweetheart," Leah whispered, grabbing napkins. Daniel reached for his briefcase. Too late. A small splash dotted his sleeve. He stared at the faint stain like it was a personal insult. "You might want to teach him a little control," he said coolly. Leah froze. Her voice trembled. "He's only 6. Age isn't an excuse for chaos," Daniel replied, wiping his sleeve with a precision that bordered on cruelty. "Some of us are trying to work." Eli looked up, eyes wide and wet. "I'm sorry, mister." The apology of a child. Simple. Pure. But Daniel didn't respond. Before we dive in, hit like, subscribe, and drop your location in the comments. I want to know where my story fam is watching from. Now, let's get into it. Leah's lips parted. She wanted to defend her son, to lash out. But years of swallowing words had taught her silence was safer. Minutes passed. The plane leveled. The sky stretched vast and endless outside the oval window. Leah gazed at the horizon. She'd once flown through skies like that. But under very different circumstances, she'd told no one on this plane who she used to be. Captain Amelia Torres. Call sign Falcon. A fighter pilot who once roared across war zones at supersonic speeds. But that was before the accident. Before fire and guilt and the letter that ended her career. Now she was Miss Torres, single mother. Seat 23C. A ghost of the woman she used to be in first class. Daniel adjusted his tie and opened a folder labeled Cross Technologies Acquisition. He barely noticed the flight attendants, or the faint laughter of a child somewhere behind him. Business. Results. Efficiency. Those were his currencies. He built walls of numbers and marble offices, never realizing how lonely success could sound at cruising altitude. Still, his thoughts kept drifting to the woman he'd scolded. Something about her calm under embarrassment unsettled him. Most people would have snapped back, but she didn't. She just kept comforting her son that he pushed the thought away. Turbulence rattled the cabin suddenly. The seatbelt sign flicked on with a soft ding. A few nervous laughs followed, but Leah's instincts kicked in. Her spine straightened, eyes scanning the wing out of habit. Eli grabbed her arm. "Mommy, is the plane falling?" "No, baby." She smiled faintly, though her pulse quickened. "Just a few bumps." The engines roared louder for a second, then smoothed out. Leah exhaled, unaware that Daniel's eyes had flicked toward her from across the partition. Studying her poise, for the first time, he noticed, not her clothes, not the messy bun or cheap shoes, but her composure. The way she held steady when others fidgeted. The intercom buzzed. "Ladies and gentlemen." The captain's voice came through, calm but tired. "We're expecting mild turbulence for the next 20 minutes. Please remain seated." A few groans. The flight attendants strapped in. Daniel returned to his laptop. Leah closed her eyes briefly, listening to the rhythmic hum of the engines. That sound, once familiar, comforting, now stirred something buried deep. Her hand brushed Eli's hair. "It's okay," she whispered. But her own heart whispered a different truth. "You're not that woman anymore." As clouds swallowed the last of the daylight outside, Daniel caught himself glancing back again. The little boy was asleep now, head on his mother's arm. She wasn't scrolling through her phone or reading. She just sat there, eyes distant, watching the horizon fade. That he frowned, almost curious. Why did she look like someone waiting for a mission that would never come? He didn't know it yet. But that moment, that tiny flicker of curiosity, was the first crack in his armor. Have you ever judged someone too quickly, only to realize later they carried a story deeper than you imagined? Tell us your thoughts below. The plane had settled into the hush of mid-flight. That strange limbo where strangers coexist in a pressurized silence 35,000 feet above the earth. The lights were dimmed. The rhythmic drone of the engines was almost hypnotic. Daniel stretched, loosened his tie, and opened another email. The numbers blurred. Across the aisle partition, laughter rose briefly, a young couple sharing earbuds. It reminded him, uncomfortably, of something he hadn't felt in years: warmth. Then came a small, accidental sound, the clatter of a plastic cup hitting the floor. Leah bent to pick it up, her seatbelt tugging at her shoulder. Eli stirred, restless again. "I want to look outside," he mumbled, rubbing his eyes. "Shoo. Honey, everyone's trying to rest." But the plane jolted suddenly, a sharp, unnatural dip that sent a ripple of gasps through the cabin. Daniel's champagne glass tipped, golden liquid spilling down the tray table. "What the?" The cabin lights flickered once, twice, then dimmed completely to a beat of silence. Then the chime. The captain's voice crackled through the speakers, strained. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain calm. We're experiencing a temporary systems malfunction. Flight attendants, take your seats." The murmurs began. Nervous laughter. Questions whispered into the air that no one could answer. Eli clutched his mother's hand, eyes wide. "Mommy, are we going to crash?" Leah swallowed hard, forcing calm into her voice. "No, baby. Everything's okay." But her gaze locked on the wing through the window. She saw a faint shimmer where it shouldn't be, the flicker of emergency lights. Her instincts, dulled for years, snapped awake. The muscle memory of a life she'd buried surged through her like electricity. In first class. Daniel jabbed the call button. "Excuse me." His composure cracked for the first time. "Can someone explain what's going on?" No response. The flight attendants were strapped in tight. Faces paled. He looked down the aisle. Passengers fidgeting, murmuring, fear spreading like static. He noticed the woman in 23C again. She wasn't panicking. She was scanning, observing, counting, the same way he'd once seen his security detail scan a hostile crowd. A bang sounded from beneath the fuselage. The lights went out completely. Screams erupted. The plane shook violently, luggage falling from overhead bins. Then, through the chaos, a new voice. The captain, trembling, urgent. "This is the flight deck. We have a control systems failure and partial power loss. We need a pause." Static. Then the words that froze the cabin. "Any fighter pilot on board?" The world seemed to stop. People looked at each other, bewildered. A man laughed nervously. "Is this some kind of joke?" Daniel turned pale. His hand gripped the armrest until his knuckles whitened. Did he just say? But before he could finish, Leah was already unbuckling her seatbelt, Eli grabbed her arm. Mommy, what's happening? Her voice was steady now. I'll be right back, sweetheart. She looked to the woman beside her. Please, can you watch him for a second? The woman nodded, eyes wide. Daniel watched, disbelief etched across his face, as the same woman he'd mocked, with the worn duffel and tired eyes, moved through the aisle with quiet authority. Miss, you need to sit down. A flight attendant shouted as the plane lurched again. I used to fly F-16s, Leah said calmly, showing an ID tag she hadn't touched in years, frayed, faded, but unmistakable. Let me help your captain. The attendant hesitated only a moment before relaying it to the cockpit that Daniel's pulse thundered. He could barely process what he was seeing. F-16s? He remembered his own words from an hour ago. Teach your kids some control, and they burned like acid. Leah disappeared through the cockpit door, which slammed shut behind her. The cabin fell into stunned quiet. Minutes stretched like hours. The turbulence worsened. Overhead compartments swung open. Someone was crying. Another prayed aloud. Daniel's hands shook. She's really helping them, he muttered. The flight attendant nearest him nodded, her voice trembling. The captain said, she's giving instructions. Something about hydraulic pressure. He leaned back, eyes unfocused, heart thudding. The woman he'd dismissed as fragile was now the axis on which every life in this plane turned. Inside the cockpit, Leah was a different person. Her voice clipped, confident. Check the secondary pump. Pull circuit 22B offline. The co-pilot obeyed. How do you know this system? I trained on the same model before they retired my squadron, she said. Her hands flew across the console, rerouting manual control. Sweat glistened on her temple. We're not done yet. We've still got pitch instability. The captain, face pale but steady, met her eyes. You've done this before. Too many times, Leah whispered. Let's bring them home. In the cabin, Daniel sat motionless. He could hear faint words from the intercom, snippets of Leah's calm voice, technical but grounded, echoing through the metal hull. Altitude holding steady. Adjusting pitch. We've got it. The cabin erupted in a collective gasp as the violent shaking eased into a trembling glide. Eli peeked over the seat, eyes wide. Mommy. The attendant smiled shakily. She's helping the captain, sweetheart. Daniel covered his face with his hands. Guilt swelled in his chest. Hot, choking. He'd looked down on her, mocked her, measured her by appearances. Now she was up front fighting for his life. When he looked up again, his reflection in the dark window startled him. He looked smaller, human, uncertain. He whispered under his breath, what kind of man have I become? After several tense minutes, the intercom crackled again. Ladies and gentlemen, the situation is stabilizing. We owe that to a passenger on board, former Air Force Captain Amelia Torres. She's assisting us in regaining full control. Cheers. Gasps. Applause scattered through the cabin. Eli beamed. That's my mommy. Daniel's throat tightened. He clapped too. Hesitantly at first, then harder. The applause spread until the cabin echoed with relief and awe. But under that applause, Daniel didn't just feel gratitude. He felt ashamed, because in her courage, he saw every weakness in himself. The plane steadied at a lower altitude. People began to breathe again. Leah returned from the cockpit, pale but composed. The flight attendants thanked her. Passengers whispered as she passed. She just smiled faintly and returned to Eli, who threw his arms around her. Mommy, you saved us. She kissed his forehead. Not yet, sweetheart. But we're going to be okay. Across the aisle, Daniel caught her eye. For the first time, he didn't see a stranger. He saw a hero. He opened his mouth, to apologize, to say something. Anything. But words failed him. She gave him a small nod before closing her eyes, resting her forehead against her son's. What would you have thought if you were on that plane? The moment you realized the person everyone judged was the one who would save you? Share your thoughts in the comments. The plane cruised through uneasy calm. The cabin lights flickered back to life, but the air remained heavy, charged, as though everyone sensed the balance between life and loss was still fragile. Daniel sat rigid, his laptop forgotten, his thoughts tumbling in disarray. Every few seconds, his eyes flicked toward row 23, toward her. The woman he'd judged, now sitting quietly, holding her son, eyes distant. Passengers still whispered her name, Captain Torres. To them, she was a hero. To Daniel, She was a mirror he didn't want to face that he'd spent years building a life of control, power, precision. Yet when real crisis came, it wasn't wealth or intellect that mattered. It was courage. And he'd had none. Ladies and gentlemen, the captain's voice returned, steadier now. We're currently on manual systems. We'll be rerouting to Denver for an emergency landing. Please remain calm and seated. A collective sigh swept through the cabin. Half relief, half dread. Leah didn't move. Her fingers drummed on her armrest, an old pilot's rhythm, counting seconds between system checks. Her mind buzzed with numbers, airspeed calculations, and memory flashes of another cockpit. Fire, alarms, the sound of her fiancé's voice cut short by static. Mommy? Eli's small voice pulled her back. She smiled faintly. Yeah, baby. Are you scared? She hesitated, then shook her head. Not when you're with me. But inside, fear gnawed like acid. Not of dying, but of failing again. A flight attendant approached quietly. Captain Torres, the cockpit might need you again. They're having trouble with the descent controls. Leah froze. Descent controls? Yes, ma'am. The stabilizer's acting up again. Her stomach tightened. That word, stabilizer, was a ghost from her past. The same malfunction had caused her fiancé's jet to spiral uncontrollably. She swallowed hard. I'll come, she said softly. Eli gripped her sleeve. Don't go. I'll be back before you know it. She kissed his hair and stood as she passed Daniel's row. Their eyes met. He opened his mouth. Wait. She stopped, barely turning her head. I owe you an apology, he said, voice low but raw. For earlier. For everything. Leah's expression didn't change, but her voice softened. You don't owe me anything, Mr. Cross. I do, he insisted. You were calm when I wasn't. You were strong when He stopped, searching for the right word. Was small. Her gaze flickered with something almost kind. Then maybe this flight's teaching both of us something. And she walked on. Daniel sat back, exhaling shakily. His hand trembled as he loosened his tie again. Teaching both of us something. The words echoed that he wasn't used to being wrong. But this wasn't about pride anymore. This was about perspective. About realizing he'd lived his whole life at cruising altitude. Never looking down. Never really seeing anyone below. That he looked at the people around him. The elderly woman praying under her breath. The teenage boy clinging to his headphones. The mother and son who'd become symbols of grace. For the first time, Daniel felt what humility truly was. In the cockpit. Leah slid into the jump seat beside the captain. Report, she said, her tone sharp again. The co-pilot pointed to a flashing light. Trims locking. We're fighting descent control. If this goes, we lose pitch authority. She studied the screen. We need manual override. Reroute hydraulic pressure to the right actuator. That's risky, the captain said. So is falling out of the sky, she replied calmly. I'll guide you. As they worked, the plane shuddered again. Leah's fingers hovered over the throttle, muscle memory, instinct, ghosts. Her chest tightened. Her breathing quickened. The co-pilot noticed. You okay? She nodded. Just focus. But her mind flashed back. The fire, the screaming radio. I can't pull up, Leah. And she blinked hard to silence it. Back in the cabin, Daniel could hear muffled commands from the cockpit, though the words were indistinct. He saw passengers whispering prayers again. His phone buzzed uselessly, no signal. He glanced down at a photo on his lock screen, him and his ex-wife at a galley years ago. Both smiling, perfectly staged. Empty eyes, he whispered. If we make it down, I'll change. It wasn't a prayer, it was a promise. The turbulence hit again, harder. The seatbelt sign blinked furiously. Gasps. Crying. Eli whimpered. Where's mommy? Daniel leaned across the aisle instinctively. Hey, buddy. She's helping the pilots, remember? Eli sniffled. What if she gets hurt? Daniel hesitated, then said, Your mom's the bravest person I've ever seen. She's not the one we need to worry about. She's the one saving us. The boy stared at him for a long moment, then nodded, clutching his stuffed bear. Inside the cockpit, the gauges flickered. Leah's hands were steady now. Sweat beaded her forehead, but her voice was even. Stabilizer neutral. Manual override engaged. The captain exhaled. You just bought us a landing window. Leah smiled faintly. Then let's use it. But as she said it, the intercom light flashed red, cabin pressure warning. Her pulse jumped. Sir, we've got a pressure leak. We need to drop altitude fast. Do it. The captain started descent. The plane tilted sharply, a roller coaster drop. Screams erupted from the cabin. Daniel gripped his armrests, teeth clenched. Come on, come on, he whispered. His stomach lurched as they lost altitude, his mind flashing back to Leah's calm voice, her words like a tether. Maybe this flight's teaching both of us something. For the first time in his life, Daniel prayed. Not for his company, not for his wealth, just for a chance to tell someone thank you. After minutes that felt eternal, the descent evened out. The pressure alarm silenced. The plane glided smoothly again. The intercom clicked. This is your captain. We've regained control. We'll be landing shortly. And I want to say, Captain Torres, you saved our lives again. Cheers again, louder this time. But Leah didn't bask in it. She just leaned back in the cockpit, closing her eyes, letting the sound wash over her. Her lips trembled as she whispered to herself, "You'd be proud of me, Sam." In the cabin, Daniel's eyes glistened. He looked toward the cockpit, emotion welling in his chest, gratitude tangled with remorse. For the first time in his adult life, he didn't feel powerful. He felt human, and it felt right. Do you believe people can truly change after a moment that humbles them? Or do most go back to who they were once the danger passes? Share your thoughts in the comments. When the wheels touched down, the cabin erupted in applause. The sound was ragged, desperate, the kind of clapping that came from survival, not celebration. The plane taxied slowly down the runway, and relief swept over every soul on board. But Leah stayed in the cockpit long after the engines powered down. Her hands still trembled. The rhythmic clicking of cooling metal reminded her of the hangars she used to walk through after missions. Her throat burned. The captain turned to her quietly. "You saved all of us today." Leah forced a smile. "Just did what needed doing. You could have stayed in your seat. You didn't." She nodded once, then unbuckled. Habit. When she stepped into the aisle, passengers broke into spontaneous applause again. Some reached for her hands. Others just whispered thanks through tears. Eli wriggled out of his seat and ran straight to her. "Mommy," he cried, throwing his arms around her waist. She crouched down, clutching him tightly. "Hey, little man. Were you scared?" he asked again, voice muffled against her uniform jacket. She smiled through a rush of tears. "Maybe a little. But you were brave." Her voice cracked. "Yeah, we both were." Daniel stood a few feet away, silent amid the chaos. He'd seen many forms of power, the ruthless kind, the strategic kind, the kind that signs contracts worth billions. But this quiet grace. It dismantled him to as the crowd thinned and rescue teams boarded. Daniel stepped closer. He held his briefcase awkwardly, unsure how to start. "Captain Torres." She turned, still holding Eli's hand. "Mr. Cross." He swallowed hard. "You probably don't want to talk to me right now." "Actually," she said softly, "I think you're exactly the person who needs to talk right now." Her tone wasn't sharp, it was tired, kind, and it disarmed him. Outside, the passengers were herded into a private terminal room. Blankets, bottled water, medics checking pulses. Daniel and Leah ended up sitting only a few seats apart, the kind of accident that didn't feel like one. Eli was asleep across Leah's lap, his head resting against her arm. She kept brushing his hair out of his face, her gaze lost in middle distance. Daniel leaned forward. "He's a brave kid. He's all I've got," she said quietly. Daniel hesitated, then asked, "Was that true? You were a fighter pilot?" Leah gave a small smile. "Feels like another lifetime. You were amazing up there." She looked at him, not proud, just honest. "You didn't think so 2 hours ago." Daniel winced. "I know. I was." He stopped, searching for the right word. "I was the kind of man who thinks he can read people by their clothes." "You're not the first," she said gently. "Won't be the last." "No," he replied. "But I'd like to be the one who learns from it." Silence stretched between them, not uncomfortable, just heavy with the weight of everything unsaid. After a moment, Leah's voice softened. "You remind me of my old CO." Daniel blinked. "Your commanding officer?" "Yeah. Brilliant guy. Thought he knew everything about control. Until one day he lost it and realized control's just an illusion. We spend so much time fighting chaos we forget how to live inside it." Daniel stared at her. "You sound like you've lived that lesson." "I have," she said. "Twice." An airline supervisor approached them. "Ma'am, sir, We've arranged hotel accommodations for all passengers. But with system checks ongoing, we'll need to keep you nearby for debriefing." Daniel and Leah exchanged a glance. Forced proximity made literal, Leah sighed. Of course. An hour later, they found themselves in a quiet corner of a Denver hotel lobby, waiting for updates. The hum of muted voices and the faint scent of coffee filled the air. Eli lay on a couch nearby, wrapped in a blanket. Daniel watched Leah cradle a cup of tea, her hands steady again. "You know," he said quietly, "people are going to talk about what you did today for years." "I hope they don't," she replied. "I didn't do it for attention. That's exactly why they'll remember." She smirked faintly. "You talk like a man who's trying to make amends." "I am," he admitted. "I don't think I've ever respected anyone as much as I respect you right now." Her eyes softened. "Respect's a good start. Then maybe we can start there." She looked at him for a long beat, assessing, cautious, but not closed. "Maybe," she said at last. He hesitated before asking, "Why do you leave flying?" Her hand stilled. The air seemed to thicken. "There was an accident," she said slowly. "A malfunction. My partner, we were supposed to eject. I made it. He didn't." Daniel's throat tightened. "I'm sorry." "So was I," she whispered. "For a long time." She looked at Eli sleeping. "I promised I'd never risk him losing me too. That's why I left the sky." Daniel nodded, silent. Then, softly, "But today, you flew again." Her lips curved in a sad smile. "Yeah, I guess I did." For a moment, neither spoke. Outside, the snow started falling, soft, endless flakes against the glass. Daniel watched her watching the snow. "You know," he said, "people spend fortunes chasing the kind of peace you have right now." She chuckled. "It's not peace, Daniel. It's exhaustion. Then maybe peace comes next." Their eyes met, and something fragile and new stirred between them. Have you ever misjudged someone at first sight, only to realize later they were everything you needed to learn from? Share your story in the comments. Morning crept into the hotel through half-drawn curtains, pale and quiet after the storm. Snow layered the tarmac outside, planes sitting idle, their wings rimmed with frost. Inside, the stranded passengers lingered over free breakfast trays, the adrenaline of survival now replaced with reflection. Leah sat alone by the window, her son still asleep in their shared room upstairs. Her tea had gone cold. She stared at the snow, tracing invisible flight patterns across the glass with one fingertip. She hadn't slept at all. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the cockpit, the flashing red warning lights, the pull of gravity, the impossible calm she'd forced herself to wear like armor. Still seeing it? The voice behind her made her flinch. "Daniel." He stood holding 2 cups of coffee, his suit jacket gone, sleeves rolled up, eyes tired but soft. Leah offered a faint smile. "You don't miss much, do you?" He sat opposite her. "You don't hide much." She exhaled a slow breath, letting the quiet stretch. "You ever wish you could turn your brain off for a night?" He nodded. "Every night." They sat like that for a while, both watching the snow in silence. Daniel finally spoke. "You said yesterday there was an accident. Your partner, Sam." She finished for him, voice thin but steady. "His name was Sam Harper. We were engaged. We flew F-18s out of Miramar. We were the kind of couple that made the headlines." Her eyes drifted, lost in memory. "There was a routine test flight. Hydraulic failure. I told him to eject first. He refused. He said, 'Ladies first.' He thought he could stabilize it long enough for both of us to get out." She swallowed. "He was wrong." Daniel didn't speak. He just listened. "When the explosion hit, I saw his jet break apart midair." She continued, voice trembling. "It's been 8 years, and I still hear the sound every time I close my eyes. After that, I grounded myself. Literally. You left the Air Force." "Yeah. I traded a cockpit for a stroller." She smiled faintly, but it didn't reach her eyes. "People thought I was brave for moving on. But I wasn't. I was running." Daniel looked down, fingers tightening around his coffee cup. "I know something about running." Leah's eyes flicked up. "Oh." He nodded slowly. "When my daughter died, I didn't cry. I just went back to work." Leah's eyes softened. "You have a daughter?" "Had," he corrected quietly. "Her name was Lily. She was 7. Car accident. I was supposed to pick her up that day, but I was in a meeting about a merger. I told her mom I'd be late." His voice cracked. "They were hit by a drunk driver on the way home." The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was reverent, heavy with pain that both of them knew too well. "I'm so sorry," Liao whispered. He nodded, eyes glassy. "I told myself for years that success would make it mean something. That if I built enough, earned enough, I'd somehow make her proud. But all I did was build walls around a grave." Liao reached across the table, her hand brushing his. "You don't make them proud by what you build, Daniel. You make them proud by how you love." He looked up at her, really looked, and saw something he hadn't seen in anyone for years. "Truth. You sound like you've forgiven yourself," he said. She shook her head gently. "No, but I've learned to live with the noise." Eli appeared then, sleepy-eyed, dragging his blanket. "Mommy, hey, baby," she said softly, motioning for him to come closer. Daniel watched the boy climb into her lap, curling into her like he'd done 1,000 times before. The tenderness hit him harder than he expected. "You two have something special," he said quietly. Leah smiled. "He saved me. I thought I'd never feel purpose again." Then he showed up, and suddenly the ground didn't feel so heavy. Later that afternoon, an airline representative gathered passengers in the lounge to issue refunds and rebookings. Chaos resumed briefly, papers rustling, voices rising. But for Daniel and Leah, time had slowed. He found himself standing beside her again as she filled out forms. "You heading back to LA?" he asked. She nodded. "Yeah, my mom's waiting for Eli." Daniel hesitated. "I have a layover there. Maybe I could buy you both dinner?" "To say thank you." Leah looked up, surprised. "Dinner? Unless you still think I'm the arrogant millionaire from seat 4A. Her lips curved. "Oh, you definitely are. But maybe a dinner's a start. Then it's a deal." They shared a smile, the kind that lingered a second too long. The kind that hinted at possibility. As Daniel turned to leave, he paused. "Leah." "Yeah." He exhaled. "You said once you left the sky for good. But after yesterday, do you think maybe you'll fly again?" She looked out the window, where a single plane lifted into the pale blue morning, and whispered, "Maybe I already did." That night, in his hotel room, Daniel sat at the edge of the bed, staring at his laptop screen. He opened a file titled Cross Foundation, Future Projects, and scrolled down. He hesitated. Then typed, "New Initiative, Scholarships for Women Veterans and Single Mothers in Aviation." He stared at the blinking cursor. Then hit save. A tear rolled down his cheek, not from grief, but from release. When life breaks you, what helps you start again? Guilt, love, or purpose? Which one would you choose? Leave your thoughts below. The next afternoon, sunlight flooded through the hotel's glass lobby as passengers prepared for their rebooked flights. The chaos had calmed. Laughter, even, the sound of people remembering how to live after fear. Leah sat by a tall window, her suitcase at her feet, Eli munching on a chocolate muffin beside her. Daniel appeared from the check-in desk, carrying 2 coffees and an extra muffin. "I took a gamble," he said, setting one in front of her. "I figured black, no sugar." She arched an eyebrow. "You guessed right. I pay attention now," he said with a faint smile. They sat quietly, watching the planes take off in slow rhythm across the snow-dusted runway. "Feels different seeing them now," Daniel said. "Like they're not just machines anymore." "They never were," Leah replied softly. "Each one carries someone's whole world inside it." He looked at her, a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "You really love flying, don't you?" She hesitated. "I love what flying used to mean. Freedom, direction, control." "Control," he echoed, sipping his coffee. "Yeah, that one's familiar." Leah chuckled quietly. "You seem like a man who doesn't like turbulence." He laughed, surprising himself. "You're not wrong." Then, after a beat, "But maybe it's time I stop living my life on autopilot." Eli perked up. "Mommy, what's autopilot?" Leah smiled. "It's when you let the plane fly itself for a while." Daniel added gently. "But sometimes you have to take the controls yourself, especially when things get rough." Eli nodded as if he understood completely, then asked, "Are you and Mr. Daniel friends now?" The question made both adults pause. Leah smiled at her son. "Yeah," she said softly. "I think we are." A few hours later, their flights were delayed again, another snow system moving in. Passengers groaned, but Daniel saw it differently. More time. He spent it sitting across from Leah and Eli, listening to their stories. She told him about growing up near an airbase, about tracing jets across the sky with her fingers. He told her about his first failed business at 21, and the lesson it taught him: failure isn't fatal. But pride can be. They laughed easily now. The tension between them replaced by something gentle. Almost protective. At one point, Leah excused herself to make a call. Eli wandered toward the window where Daniel joined him. My mom likes you, Eli said simply, looking out at the plains. Daniel smiled. Does she? Eli nodded solemnly. She smiles different when you're around. Daniel's throat tightened. That's a pretty big thing to say, buddy. I know stuff, Eli said proudly, then tilted his head. Do you have kids? Daniel hesitated. I did. A little girl. She would have been about your age. Eli turned to him, eyes full of empathy far beyond his years. I'm sorry. Daniel knelt beside him. Thanks, kiddo. You kind of remind me of her. You know that? Brave. Funny. You talk too much. Eli giggled. Mom says that about me too. Daniel laughed softly. Then she's right. When Leah returned, she found Daniel teaching Eli how to fold paper airplanes from napkins. There were 3 already gliding lazily through the lobby air. What's this? She asked, pretending to scold. Flight training, Daniel said. I'm his new co-pilot. Uh-huh. She picked up one of the napkin planes, running her thumb over the folded edges. Not bad. High praise from a pro, he teased. Leah smirked. Don't let it go to your head. He grinned, leaning back. Too late. As evening approached, they were finally rebooked on the same connecting flight to LA. Fate's little nudge again. The boarding gate was quiet, soft instrumental music playing overhead. Daniel offered to help with Eli's luggage. You've done enough flying for all of us, he joked. I'll take the help, Leah admitted, smiling. As they walked down the jet bridge, Daniel glanced sideways. Can I ask something without sounding forward? Depends on how forward. He chuckled nervously. Would it be too much to stay in touch? Maybe dinner again, somewhere not in crisis? Leah looked at him, her expression unreadable for a moment. Then, gently, dinner sounds nice. Once airborne again, the mood was calm, almost serene. Eli dozed off between them, his head resting against Leah's arm. Daniel stared out at the clouds, then spoke quietly. You know what's crazy? If that flight hadn't gone wrong, I never would have met you. I'd still be the same man I was. Leah turned to him, her voice soft. And you don't want to be that man anymore? He shook his head. No, not when I've seen what real strength looks like. She studied him, eyes gentle. You know, Daniel, strength isn't not being afraid. It's doing what you have to do even when you are. He nodded slowly, absorbing it. Then I think I'm finally learning. The flight attendant dimmed the lights. Outside, the stars stretched endless over the horizon, a sea of light against black. Leah glanced at Daniel, his face calm for the first time since she'd met him. Something inside her eased too. Thank you, he murmured suddenly. For what? For letting me start over, even if you don't realize you did. She smiled faintly. Maybe we both get a new start. The hum of the engines filled the quiet. It wasn't awkward anymore. It was comforting, like the rhythm of 2 hearts learning to beat in sync again after too much silence. Leah leaned her head back, eyes half closed. You know what's funny? What? I used to think I'd never belong anywhere that didn't have wings. Daniel looked at her. And now? She smiled softly. Now I think maybe belonging isn't about where you are. It's about who you're with. Do you think it's possible for 2 broken people to heal each other? Or do we have to heal ourselves first? Let's hear your thoughts in the comments. Los Angeles shimmered beneath them as the plane descended, a sprawl of gold and silver veins pulsing with life. When the tires kissed the runway, the cabin erupted in polite applause, but the moment felt different this time. Quieter, more personal. Daniel turned toward Leah, offering a small smile. Welcome home. Feels strange, she admitted, glancing out at the endless city lights. Like the world kept moving while I was still catching my breath. He nodded. Maybe it was waiting for you. She laughed softly. You really are getting good at this whole human thing. Don't tell my shareholders, he joked, earning another smile. At baggage claim. Eli tugged Daniel's sleeve excitedly. Are you coming with us? Daniel glanced at Leah, unsure. She smiled. We're just grabbing a ride to my mom's. You've got your own world to get back to. He hesitated. Actually, that depends. I was hoping I could see you both again before you disappear into your busy lives. Leah considered him, the businessman who'd mocked her days ago, now standing like a man trying to learn how to stay. Dinner, you said? She asked. He grinned. Dinner. 3 nights later, they met at a small Italian restaurant near the coast. No reporters. No assistants. Just candlelight, soft jazz, and the sound of waves crashing outside. Daniel arrived early, uncharacteristically nervous. He caught himself checking his reflection in the window and laughed quietly. "You're acting like a teenager, cross," when Liao walked in, wearing a simple blue dress and a quiet smile. The room seemed to soften around her. "You clean up nice," she teased. "You terrify me," he replied truthfully. And she laughed. Dinner was easy. Laughter, stories, teasing. The tension of survival had melted into something tender. Daniel found himself listening more than speaking, drawn in by her warmth, her humility. "You know," Leah said, stirring her drink, "Eli keeps asking when we'll see you again." Daniel's heart swelled. "That kid's dangerous. He'll have me wrapped around his finger in a week." Leah chuckled. "He's good at that. He did the same thing to me." For a moment, they just looked at each other. Something unspoken passed, quiet, electric, inevitable. After dinner, they walked along the pier. The air smelled of salt and seaweed, gulls crying overhead. The city lights shimmered on the water like scattered stars. Daniel stopped at the railing, hands in his pockets. "You ever think about flying again?" "Every day," she said softly. "But I've learned not everything you lose is meant to be found again." He nodded slowly. "Maybe. Or maybe sometimes life gives you another cockpit. It just looks different." She smiled faintly. "You sound like a man who's been doing some thinking. More than I have in years." She leaned on the railing beside him, hair catching the wind. "So what are you going to do with all that thinking?" He turned to her. "This." Before she could ask, he kissed her, slow, uncertain, full of everything neither had said. She didn't pull away. For a moment, the world stopped spinning. Then she did. "Daniel." She whispered, taking a step back. "I can't." He blinked. "Can't what?" "This." Her voice trembled. You're still grieving. I'm still broken. It's too soon." "It doesn't feel too soon." "Feelings lie," she said softly. "They make us think we're ready when we're not." He exhaled sharply, stepping back. "So what are you saying? That everything we've shared, that didn't mean anything?" "I didn't say that." "Then what are you saying, Leah?" His tone rose, not angry, but hurt. "I'm saying," she said, steady but emotional, "that I can't be another project for you to fix. I can't risk Eli getting attached to someone who might walk away when life gets complicated again." His face fell. "You think I'd do that?" "You've walked away before," she said quietly. "From your daughter's pickup, from your own pain, from people." The words struck like a physical blow. He looked at her, eyes full of disbelief and grief. "That's not fair." "Neither is life," she whispered. Silence. Just the sound of the waves crashing below. He looked away first. "I thought what we went through meant something." "It does," she said, voice shaking. "But meaning doesn't always mean timing." He nodded, blinking hard. "You're right. You deserve someone who's already whole." She reached for him. "Daniel," he pulled back. "No, you're right. You and your son deserve better than a man who's still learning how to be one." He turned and walked down the pier, his footsteps fading into the wind. Leah stood there, eyes glistening. Watching him disappear into the dark, she whispered to the waves, "I didn't mean goodbye." That night, back home, Eli noticed her quietness. "Mommy, why are you sad?" She smiled weakly. "Just tired, sweetheart." "Did Mr. Daniel make you sad?" She paused, then shook her head. "No, honey. He just reminded me that brave doesn't always mean strong." Eli tilted his head, confused. "But you said he was nice." "He is," she said softly. "That's what makes it hard." Meanwhile, in his penthouse overlooking the city, Daniel sat in the dark, staring at the faint outline of the ocean. His chest ached, not from rejection, but from realization. For the first time in years, he'd felt alive. And losing that, even briefly, felt unbearable. He picked up his phone, thumb hovering over her number. But he didn't call. Instead, he whispered to the empty room, "You're right. Leah, I need to learn how to stay before I ask anyone else to." He set the phone down and finally let himself cry. Not for Lily this time, but for the man he was finally learning to become. Have you ever walked away from someone? Not because you didn't care, but because you weren't ready to love them right? Would you go back if you could? For Leah, mornings became heavier. She still packed Eli's lunch, brushed his hair, tied his shoelaces, and smiled. But her eyes betrayed the truth. Every little thing reminded her of Daniel. The way Eli lined up his toy planes, just like Mr. Daniel's jet. Mommy. The caramel candies he'd sneak into their bag. The quiet warmth in his voice when he'd said, "You're safe with me." She'd known better than to hope, but hope didn't listen to reason. It just lingered at night. When the house was quiet and Eli had fallen asleep, Liao would step outside to the small porch behind her mother's home. From there, she could see the faint glow of the city skyline in the distance, Daniel's world. She wondered if he ever thought about her, or if that world of glass towers and business calls had swallowed him again. Her mother noticed. "You look like someone who left part of herself somewhere." Liao smiled faintly. "Maybe I did." Her mom sipped her tea, eyes soft. "Then go get it back." "I can't," Liao whispered. "He needs time." "I need time." Her mother tilted her head. "Time's a liar. It promises healing, but it really just gives you space to decide whether to be brave or to stay afraid." Liao looked down at her hands, the same hands that had once flown F-16s through enemy skies. She had risked her life without hesitation, but when it came to love, she'd retreated. Maybe her mother was right. Maybe she wasn't afraid of Daniel. Maybe she was afraid of happiness. Meanwhile, across the city, Daniel sat in his office, staring at the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the skyline. The world had gone back to normal. Meetings, numbers, contracts, but nothing felt normal. He'd returned to work only to find himself haunted by everything Liao had said. "You've walked away before. You're still learning how to be a man. You and your son deserve better." She hadn't said them to hurt him. She'd said them because they were true. And somehow, that truth had cut deeper than any insult could. His assistant, Grace, knocked gently. "Sir, the investors are waiting." He nodded absently. "Tell them to wait a few minutes." She hesitated. "You've made them wait an hour already." Daniel smiled faintly. "Then what's a few more minutes?" When she left, he stood and walked toward the framed photo that hung in his office, one he hadn't really looked at in years. It was of Lily, his daughter, taken the day before she'd died. Her smile was full of mischief and sunlight. He touched the glass gently. "I think I get it now, kiddo," he whispered. It wasn't about being perfect. It was about showing up. And suddenly, he knew what he had to do. The next day, Daniel drove 2 hours out of the city to a small community airfield he'd read about online, one that hosted weekend flying lessons for veterans and former pilots. He'd seen Leah's name listed among the volunteer instructors. He waited near the hangar, hands in his pockets, the scent of jet fuel and rain in the air, when she finally appeared, wearing her flight jacket and aviator shades. He almost forgot how to speak. She froze when she saw him. "Daniel. Hey. What are you doing here?" He smiled sheepishly, trying to learn how to stay. Her brows furrowed. "You drove all the way out here for that line?" "No," he said softly. "I came to say I'm sorry." She blinked. "For what?" "For letting fear talk louder than my heart." Liao folded her arms, but her expression softened. "You don't owe me an apology." "I do," he said firmly. "You were right. I walk away when things hurt. I hide behind work, behind control, behind the lie that I don't care. But the truth is, Liao, I've cared about you and Eli since the moment that cockpit door closed, and you saved us all." Her breath caught. "Daniel, I told myself I wasn't ready. But maybe being ready isn't the point. Maybe love's just about showing up, scared, flawed, and real, and trying anyway." Silence hung between them, heavy and trembling. The sound of a small prop plane roared overhead, echoing through the airfield. Finally, Liao whispered, "You don't know what you're asking." "I'm asking for a chance," he said quietly. "Not to fix you, not to rescue you, just to be beside you." Her eyes glistened. She looked away, torn between fear and longing. "Do you really think people like us get a second chance?" She asked. He stepped closer. "I think people like us have already survived the first crash. What's one more flight?" That made her laugh through the tears. She shook her head, smiling despite herself. "You're impossible." "I know," he said softly. "But I'm here." She looked at him, really looked, and saw it. The humility, the regret, the quiet determination in his eyes. After a long pause, she whispered, "If we do this, it has to be slow. For Eli. For me." He nodded. "Slow sounds perfect." They stood in silence for a moment, the hum of distant engines filling the air. Then, instinctively, she reached into her pocket and pulled out a small dog tag, scratched, worn, but polished around the edges. This was my call sign tag, she said, pressing it into his hand. I stopped wearing it the day I stopped flying. He ran his thumb across the letters. Falcon. Why give this to me? She smiled faintly. Because you helped me remember who I was. He looked at her, emotions swelling in his throat. And you helped me find who I could be. That evening, Daniel watched Leah take to the sky in a small trainer jet. The sun hung low, painting the clouds in streaks of gold and rose. Her plane ascended, rolled once, then leveled perfectly. He smiled, whispering, "Welcome back, Captain." Down below, Eli waved wildly, shouting, "That's my mom." Daniel knelt beside him, heart full. "Yeah, kiddo, that's your mom. The bravest person I've ever met." And for the first time in a long, long while, Daniel Cross felt peace. You believe people deserve a second chance at love, even after they've been broken? Would you take the leap again, knowing how much it might hurt? 6 months later, the world had moved on, as it always did, but for Leah Torres. Life finally felt like it was moving with her. The smell of coffee filled her small home as morning lights spilled through the curtains. Eli, now 7, zoomed his toy plane across the kitchen counter. "Mom, guess what?" he shouted, making explosion sounds. "My teacher said I can do my project on heroes, and I picked you." Leah smiled over her mug. "Me? What about Spider-Man or Captain America?" Eli shook his head fiercely. "Nope. You're way cooler. You saved a whole airplane." Her heart swelled. "Well, make sure you mention teamwork, okay? Heroes never work alone." As if on cue, the doorbell rang. Eli's grin widened. Speaking of teamwork, Leah opened the door, and there he was. Daniel Cross, standing in a soft gray jacket, holding a paper bag that smelled of cinnamon rolls and coffee. "Breakfast delivery for my favorite pilot and co-pilot," he said, smiling. "Hey, you're early," she teased, stepping aside to let him in. "I'm improving," he said with mock pride. "I only got lost twice this time." Eli ran to hug him, and Daniel crouched down, scooping him up effortlessly. "Hey, buddy, I hear you've got a hero for a mom. Think she'd sign my flight jacket." Eli giggled. "Only if you say please." Daniel laughed, and Leah watched them. Her son, the man who'd once mocked her, now laughing together like family. The sight filled her chest with warmth. Later that morning, they drove out to the airfield again. The same one where Daniel had first shown up months ago, uncertain and raw. But today, the air felt different, lighter, freer. Leah was preparing for a demonstration flight for a group of aviation students. Daniel and Eli stood near the hangar, watching her prep the sleek trainer jet. "You nervous?" Daniel asked. Leah smiled. "Not at all. The sky used to be my home. Took me a while to remember that." He nodded, admiring her, not just her strength, but her grace. "Funny," he said softly. "You helped me find mine, too." She tilted her head. "Your home. My peace," he said simply. Their eyes met, steady, unhurried. Sure. When the flight began, Leah's plane soared effortlessly, looping and rolling through the open blue. The crowd below watched in awe, but Daniel couldn't take his eyes off her. He remembered the woman hunched over in a coach seat, mocked and misunderstood. Now, she danced with the clouds. Eli tugged at his sleeve. "Mr. Daniel, are you ever going to fly too?" Daniel chuckled. "No, kiddo. I think I'll leave that to the professionals." "But you helped her fly again," Eli said innocently. Daniel looked down, stunned by the boy's words. Then he smiled softly. "Maybe we helped each other." When Leah landed, the students rushed to her, cheering. She laughed, flushed from adrenaline, and waved at Daniel and Eli. Daniel met her halfway across the tarmac. "You were amazing," he said, breathless. She shrugged playfully. "Just doing my job." He stepped closer, and doing it beautifully. She rolled her eyes. "You're still terrible at compliments." "Yeah," he admitted, "but I'm working on it." That evening, after the students had gone and the sun began to sink into the Pacific, Leah and Daniel sat on the hood of his car, watching the sky fade from gold to lavender. He took a deep breath. "You know, 6 months ago, I didn't even know who I was. I was a man pretending to live. Then a woman on a flight reminded me what courage looked like." She smiled gently. "You found that courage yourself." He shook his head. "No, you gave me something to believe in again, and I don't want to lose that." Her heart skipped. "Daniel." He reached into his pocket and pulled out the dog tag she'd given him. "You said this was your call sign, Falcon. I kept it to remind me what real strength looks like. He turned it over, revealing an engraving added to the back. It read, Falcon and Cross, Flight Crew. Her eyes filled with tears. You didn't. I did, he said softly. Because this time, I'm not walking away. Not from you. Not from Eli. Not from the chance to be something real. She blinked back tears. Are you sure? It won't be easy. He smiled. Good. Easy never made sense for people like us. And then, as the sky blushed with twilight, he kissed her, slow, grounded, steady. The kind of kiss that said home. Weeks later, a new story went viral. A passenger had snapped a photo of a smiling woman in a flight jacket boarding a commercial jet. Her name tag reading Captain Amelia Torres. The headline read, Single mom who saved flight 6 months ago returns to the cockpit. And in the comments below, buried among thousands of congratulations, one stood out. Proud of you, Captain. Always your co-pilot. Diesel sat between them on a blanket by the beach, roasting marshmallows. Liao leaned against Daniel, his arm around her shoulders. Above them, a jet streaked across the night sky, its contrail glowing silver in the moonlight. Eli pointed up. Mommy, look. It's like you. Liao smiled. Maybe. But that one's just passing by. Daniel looked at her with quiet affection. And we're staying. She turned to him, eyes soft. We're staying. Thanks for watching this video to the end. I'm pretty sure you enjoyed it. We have a lot of other interesting and beautiful stories lined up for you already. So click on the image showing on your screen to watch the next one.